My name is Elizabeth Harrison, but in truth, no one really knew me. Not even myself. At 22, standing on the Yale graduation stage with an honors diploma and an award for outstanding thesis, I should have been celebrating the culmination of years of work. Instead, I watched in horror, as if in slow motion, as my father Richard rose from his seat, his face contorted with cold fury. "I'm ending your funding," he announced to the hushed room, his voice echoing in every corner. "You're not my real daughter anyway. Have you ever experienced your identity being destroyed in front of hundreds of strangers? It's a strange sensation, like suddenly finding yourself naked in a crowded room, only it's not your nakedness that's on display, but every lie that was the foundation of your life." As the collective sighs echoed through the room, I caught the look on my stepmother Catherine's face. Not shock, but smug satisfaction, the culmination of a 14-year campaign to erase me from the Harrison family portrait. What neither of them knew was that the envelope in my purse contained enough evidence to bring down the house of cards they'd carefully constructed. Sometimes the truth is the most destructive weapon of all, especially when you've spent your entire life trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it. I've lived without a mother since I was 8 years old. Elaine Harrison died of an aggressive form of cancer, leaving me with a legacy of a love for art and literature. Do you remember your mother if you lost her at such a young age? I do. Her hands with her slender fingers, turning the pages of the books she read to me. Her voice explaining the difference between Impressionism and Expressionism in front of paintings in the museum. Her laughter, ringing like bells as we worked together in the garden she created behind our house. But with each passing year, Elaine's presence in the Harrison home dwindled. It began almost imperceptibly after my father married Catherine, just 2 years after my mother's death. First, the photographs disappeared, put away in drawers for safekeeping. Then, my mother's books, making room for a new collection. Her paintings don't fit in with the new interior design. And finally, the garden she so lovingly created. Too old-fashioned, needs modernizing. By my 14th birthday, there was almost nothing left to remind me of Elaine Harrison's existence in this house. Only the few books I had secretly hidden in my room, and the memories Catherine couldn't take from me, no matter how hard she tried. My relationship with my father, once warm and close, had grown cold and formal since his remarriage. The man who had once read me a bedtime story every night now barely found time for a brief good morning at breakfast. And despite all my academic achievements, gold medals, scholarships, acceptance to Yale, my successes were always taken for granted. "Of course you got a perfect score. You're Harrison," my father said with a faint smile, then immediately turned his attention to my half-brother Brandon. And Brandon's accomplishments, even the smallest ones, were celebrated with incredible pomp. When he earned a spot on the varsity baseball team, thanks to a generous donation from my father, which no one ever said out loud, there was a grand dinner with champagne and toasts. When I received a full scholarship to Yale, I got a discreet nod and a, "We expected that." You know what the weirdest thing about being raised like that? You start to believe that it's okay, that your accomplishments are worthless, that you need to constantly prove your worth. I spent 4 years at Yale constantly raising the bar for myself. Double majors, research projects, volunteer work, anything to be good enough, to earn a place in the Harrison family. As graduation approached, a strange tension built up in the family. My father often talked about financial restructuring, and when I tried to discuss my future, plans for graduate school or a job, he waved it away with irritation. "Now is not the time, Elizabeth. I have more important matters to attend to." It wasn't like him, not even the cold, detached version I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Something was definitely going on, and that something concerned me. 2 weeks before the graduation ceremony, returning to an empty house, our housekeeper, Mrs. Pearson, was on vacation. I stumbled across the ajar door of my father's study. He usually locked it carefully when he left. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when it's mixed with long-suppressed suspicions. I hadn't planned on becoming a detective in my own family. But as I entered the office, I saw an open folder of documents on the desk that could explain my father's growing coldness. My intention was simple: a quick glance to see if the family was facing a financial crisis. The last thing I expected to find was evidence of a double life. Photographs: my father with another woman and two teenagers, a boy and a girl, about my age with Brandon. Letters addressed to my dear Richard from someone named Sandra in Chicago. Financial statements showing regular transfers of large sums of money to accounts in Illinois. And most shocking of all, documents about a trust set up by my grandmother, specifically for my education, from which my father had illegally withdrawn funds for years. The photos were dated the earliest 15 years ago, the year before my mother died. Looking back now, I realize I should have felt anger, pain, betrayal. But in that moment, I felt only a strange numbness, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life. Methodically, as if preparing for an exam, I made copies of all the important documents. I photocopied the pictures, carefully put everything back where it belonged, and then I locked myself in my room and cried all night. The next 2 weeks were a blur. I took my final exams, studied for my graduation ceremony, smiled at family dinners. No one noticed the change, perhaps, because I always had to wear a mask in this house. Only now did I realize why. The envelope with the copies of the documents I'd always carried with me, not for blackmail or revenge, just as insurance. I hoped I'd never need it. That after graduation, my father and I could talk like adults. That maybe there was an explanation that at least partially justified his actions. Naive. Maybe. But when you've spent your whole life trying to earn someone's love, it's hard to break the habit right away. On graduation day, I was ready for any scenario. The strained congratulations and fake smiles for the pictures. For the announcement of the financial independence I was about to gain. I even mentally prepared myself for the possibility that my dad wouldn't show up at all, but there was no way I was expecting a public denial. I didn't think he would choose the moment of my greatest academic achievement to trample not only my reputation, but my very identity. You are not my real daughter. 5 words that were meant to destroy me, humiliate me, disinherit me, and disinherit my name, but instead, they freed me from my last illusions. Standing on the stage, feeling the stares of hundreds of people, I realized that the time to keep my father's secrets was over. That the truth, no matter how painful, was better than a life built on lies. That the envelope in my purse wasn't just insurance, but the key to my liberation. Sometimes you have to lose the family you knew to find yourself. But was I prepared for the consequences of that loss? And what awaited me on the other side of the Harrison family's shattered facade? You know how, at critical moments in life, time seems to stretch? My father's words, "You are not my real daughter," hung in the air, echoing off the walls of the auditorium. When this public denial finally died down, there was a deafening silence, broken only by the whispers of the shocked audience. All eyes turned to me, still standing behind the lectern, my hands clutching my honors diploma tightly. At that moment, I felt a strange calmness. It was as if my inner compass, long thrown off course by manipulation and lies, had finally found its true direction. Thank you all for witnessing an important moment in the Harrison family's history, I began, surprised at how steady my voice sounded, despite the adrenaline pulsing through my blood. Since my father has chosen to share his version of the truth with all of you today, I feel the need to complete the picture. Have you ever prepared for a battle you hoped to avoid? The envelope I've carried with me for the past 2 weeks has been my shield and sword, a defense I prayed never to use. Now it had become my only ally in the face of betrayal. Methodically, as if demonstrating a science experiment, I began pulling out document after document. Photographs of my father with another woman and 2 teenagers' family portraits, vacation shots, Christmas cards, financial statements proving the illegal use of the educational fund my grandmother had set up, and finally, a copy of my birth certificate to disprove the claim that I wasn't his biological daughter. My father talked about DNA and the truth. I continued, letting my voice fill not with anger, but with cold clarity. Interesting topics from a man who had supported two separate families for over 15 years, using money from a trust set up by my mother and grandmother to pay for his children's education in Chicago, while I worked several part-time jobs to cover my own expenses. My words caused a new wave of shocked gasps in the audience. I saw hundreds of eyes widen as people turned toward each other, covering their mouths with their hands. But I wasn't looking at them. My gaze was fixed on two people. My father froze in the aisle, his face completely devoid of color. The man, always so sure of his authority, always in control of every situation, looked literally paralyzed. Catherine, who a moment ago had been looking at me in triumph, now seemed frightened, her eyes darting between her husband and stepdaughter, realizing that the carefully constructed lie was crumbling in front of hundreds of witnesses. I wonder what they were thinking at that moment. Did they regret their decision to publicly humiliate themselves? Or were they just regretting not checking my purse before the ceremony? As for the claim that I'm not the real Harrison, I pulled out the last document. Our family lawyer provided me with a copy of my birth certificate and my parents' medical records. I was conceived through IVF, using my father's sperm and my mother's egg. There was no cheating, no other man. It's just another lie designed to disinherit me and strip me of my identity. I remember learning the truth about my conception. It was a casual conversation with Mrs. Pearson, our housekeeper, when I was 16. "Your mother wanted a baby so badly," she said, oblivious to the memory. 3 years of trying, specialists, procedures. When you finally came along, she was glowing with happiness. My father never talked about it, perhaps because it contradicted the narrative he had built up over the years, that my mother wasn't a good enough wife, not devoted enough. I never wanted to reveal these truths publicly, I concluded, gathering the documents back into the envelope, noticing the guards moving toward my father, who looked like he might throw himself on stage. Despite years of emotional manipulation and neglect, I continued to hope for reconciliation. But faced with public humiliation and false accusations, I will not be silent. Do you know what it's like to speak the truth you've been hiding even from yourself? It's like jumping off a cliff, the terror of the step, and then the strange sensation of flying. Liberation. In that moment, standing in front of hundreds of people, I finally felt real. No more masks, no more compromises. I could go on. How Catherine methodically erased my mother's memory from our home. How my father watched in silent complicity. How I was made to feel like a guest in my own home. But this was not my family's trial. This was my release from the chains I myself had helped forge, accepting their defiance, striving to prove my worth. There was absolute silence in the hall as I left the pulpit. People parted before me like the Red Sea before Moses. No one knew what to say, how to react to a private family drama suddenly unfolding on an academic stage. Father took a step forward as I walked by. His face was a strange mixture of rage and fear, emotions I had never seen on his face before. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. "You have no idea what you've done." "No, Father," I replied, meeting his gaze without fear for the first time in years. "You're the one who has no idea what you've done, all this time." Catherine sat frozen, her perfect makeup unable to hide the pallor of her face. Brandon, my half-brother, stared at me with his mouth open, as if seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. What do you think we see in the mirror when we stare at a distorted reflection for years? I've always seen myself through the prism of their expectations and disappointments. Not good enough. Not real enough. Always trying to earn a place in a family that was never going to accept me. That day, as I left the auditorium, I finally saw the real me, not Richard Harrison's daughter, not Catherine's stepdaughter, not Brandon's half-sister. Just Elizabeth, a person entitled to truth, to dignity, and to her own way. I didn't know what was waiting for me behind the doors. Where would I go? How would I survive? Being suddenly cut off from my family, even one so dysfunctional, left me in free fall, with no safety net or safety net. But a strange calm continued to sustain me, a calm born out of absolute clarity. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. Sometimes the price of truth is the comfort of the lies you've grown accustomed to. Is it worth it? At that moment, I didn't know yet. All I knew was that there was no turning back, and that was the beginning of my real journey, not to success or recognition, but to myself, to the Elizabeth my mother had hoped to raise before cancer took her too soon, toward a woman who could be proud of herself, not for accomplishments or titles, but for being true to her inner truth. If my story resonates with your soul, if you too have struggled with family secrets or searched for your true identity, subscribe to my channel and give this video a like. In the next installment, I'll talk about the first days of my new life and the unexpected support I found in the most unexpected places. And in the comments, please share. Was there a moment in your life when you decided to speak your truth despite the consequences? It's strange how quickly the facade of the perfect family can crumble. The hours after the graduation ceremony have descended into utter chaos. Have you ever watched carefully constructed social constructs crumble like a house of cards? It's both mesmerizing and terrifying at the same time. Father and Catherine were literally escorted off campus. Yale security was quiet but firm. Apparently, public scandal was not part of their idea of how a graduation ceremony should be conducted. The last thing I saw was my father's back, tense and straight as he got into his black Mercedes. He didn't even look back. Brandon stayed behind. He sat on a bench outside the main building with his face down in his palms. He looked crushed, a man whose world had just been turned upside down. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I wondered if he knew about our father's double life, the Chicago family, about how they systematically excluded me from full participation in the Harrison family. Elizabeth! Jessica's voice snapped me out of my reverie. Jessica Miller is my roommate my freshman year and my best friend for all 4 years at Yale, the person who saw right through me when I tried to pretend everything was fine. She ran across the lawn to me, followed by her parents. "Oh my God, are you okay?" She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. It was, I don't even know what to call it. Horrible, shocking, catastrophic? I offered, trying to smile. Incredibly brave, she said firmly, and long overdue. Susan Miller, Jessica's mother, a woman of kind eyes and determined character, approached us. "You're coming home with us, no arguments," she said, putting her arm around my shoulders gently but firmly. "Jess has already packed your things from your apartment. You're staying with us until you decide what to do next." I wanted to object, to say that I could handle it, that I didn't want to be a burden. But suddenly, my strength was gone. The adrenaline that had sustained me on the stage evaporated, leaving me empty and tired. "Thank you," was all I could squeeze out. Robert Miller, Jessica's father, was already on the phone, organizing a truck to move my things. As it turned out later, it wasn't necessary. All of my belongings were already piled in a haphazard heap outside the dormitory entrance, obviously on my father's orders during the ceremony. Have you ever seen your life piled up at your doorstep? 4 years of studying, working, growing, all packed, if you can call it that, with obvious neglect. Books that I had cherished for years, including several volumes that belonged to my mother. Clothes, crumpled and wrinkled. Photographs in broken frames. The symbolism was too obvious even for me. The man was just... Robert Miller shook his head, unable to find the words to express his outrage. "Don't worry, we'll take it all back." My phone wouldn't stop vibrating in my pocket. Social media exploded with different versions of what had happened. Yale alumna publicly disowned by father. Harrison family scandal at Yale graduation. Famous businessman's double life revealed by daughter. The messages came from distant relatives I barely spoke to, former classmates, from people I hardly knew, and even from reporters eager for comment on the Yale prom scandal. I turned my phone off. The world could wait. At the Miller house, I was greeted with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. The guest room was cozy and bright. Simple white walls, a soft bed with a patchwork quilt, a vase of fresh flowers on the bedside table. "Get some rest," Susan said, leaving me alone. "We'll be downstairs if you need us." I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly unsure of what to do with my body. For the past few weeks, I'd existed in a state of constant tension, preparing for a confrontation I'd hoped to avoid. Now that it was over, or perhaps it had just begun, I felt a strange emptiness. Who was I now? No longer Richard Harrison's daughter, no longer the heiress to his fortune, no longer part of his carefully constructed image of a successful family. Just Elizabeth, 22 years old, graduating with honors, and absolutely no idea what to do next. The days that followed blended into a blur of practical problems and unexpected support. My credit card was blocked. My father acted quickly. The bank account appeared frozen, too. Access to the family home was cut off. The locks were changed the same day. But for every door that closed, another opened unexpectedly. Professor Ramirez, my supervisor, called to offer a research assistant position for the summer. "Your work is too valuable to let personal circumstances interfere with your career," he said simply. An old family friend, Dr. Lawrence, sent a short note. "I always knew you were the real Harrison, stubborn and principled like your mother. Call me if you need help." But most unexpected was a call from Harold Winters, the family lawyer. I'd always thought he was my father's man, part of a system that worked against me. Turns out I was wrong. "Ms. Harrison," he said over the phone, "I need to see you about an important matter. Is it possible to do it today?" We met at a small cafe near the Miller house. Harold Winters, always impeccably dressed, with a neatly trimmed gray beard, looked tired and preoccupied. "First of all," he began as we settled at a table in the corner, "I want to apologize. I suspected some irregularities in your father's behavior, but I had no proof." "You work for him," I remarked. "Your loyalty is understandable." "I work for the Harrison family," he corrected me. "That includes you and your grandmother, Eleanor Clark, my mother's mother. A woman I'd only seen a few times as a child before my father had completely isolated me from my maternal relatives. I remembered her vaguely, tall, elegant, with eyes similar to my mother's. Your grandmother was deeply shocked to learn of Richard's actions, Harold Winters explained. She wants you to know that the trust set up by your mother is substantial enough to cover any outstanding school expenses and provide you with a modest income until you get back on your feet. I stared at him, not quite understanding. A trust? But Dad said Mom left nothing but her personal belongings. Winters sighed, a look of guilt on his face. Your mother was a thoughtful woman. She set up a separate trust in your name, administered by your grandmother as trustee. You were to have access to it, either when you reached the age of 25, or in the event of your father's death or incapacity. Or if he decided to publicly disown me. I grinned bitterly. Or in the event he breaches his fiduciary duties. The lawyer nodded. Which he apparently did, using money from the educational fund set up for you in favor of other individuals. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder of documents. Here are all the details of the trust, as well as the power of attorney you need to sign so I can begin the process of restoring your finances. He paused for a moment. Eleanor would also like to reconnect if you're open to it. I stared at the documents, feeling tears come to my eyes. My mother had taken care of me even after her death, protected me from what she probably feared, that her husband wouldn't take proper care of our daughter. I'd like to meet her, I said quietly. Winters nodded, clearly pleased. There's something else you should know, he added, his tone becoming more formal. Your father's response to the public exposure came in the form of legal threats. He pulled out another document, a cease and desist letter demanding a retraction of my false statements and threatening a libel lawsuit. It's a standard scare tactic, Winters explained. But when I presented the evidence you collected, The threats quickly turned into settlement offers. He handed me another document, an offer to pay a substantial sum of money in exchange for my silence and signing a non-disclosure agreement. He's desperate to prevent a lawsuit, Winters explained. Several of his business associates attended the graduation. There's already talk of an internal investigation into his financial practices. I set the document aside before I finished reading it. I don't want his money. Technically, some of that money is already yours, from the trust he used illegally, Winters pointed out. But I understand how you feel. Just remember you have options. You can countersue. You can seek compensation for years of emotional neglect. Or you can simply move on, knowing that you have the means to start a new life. A new life. Those words sounded both frightening and reassuring at the same time. A life not defined by Richard Harrison's expectations or Catherine's manipulations. A life I could build on my own terms. I need time to think, I said. Winters nodded understandingly. Of course. But let me give you one piece of advice, if I may. He leaned closer. Don't let your thirst for revenge or resentment determine your next steps. What happened was unfair and painful, but now you have a chance to create something new, something of your own. Don't waste this opportunity fighting the past. His words stayed with me as I returned to the Miller house. That evening, sitting in the guest room, I reread the trust documents. My mother, Elaine Harrison, had always seemed to me an almost mythical figure. Too perfect, too loving, too lost. But in that dry legal language, I saw glimpses of a real woman. Practical, prudent, perhaps even a little suspicious of her husband. A woman who loved her daughter enough to secure her future. You know what the hardest thing about losing a parent at an early age is? Not just the absence of that person from your life, but the gradual transformation of your memory of them. Over time, the real person with all their complexities and contradictions turns into an idealized image, almost a fairy tale character. But the documents in my hands told of a real woman. A woman who probably knew her husband's shortcomings better than anyone else, who took steps to protect her child, even when she could no longer do so herself. For the first time in a long time, I felt a real connection to my mother. Not with an idealized memory, but with a flesh-and-blood woman who fought, planned, and loved enough to foresee a future in which I would need protection. The door to my room opened quietly, and Jessica walked in with 2 cups of tea. "How are you?" she asked, sitting down next to me on the bed. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Everything has changed. And at the same time, nothing has changed. I'm still the same Elizabeth. Just now, without the mask." Jessica nodded, understanding without further explanation, as only true friends can. "Do you know that I always thought you were the strongest of us all?" she said, holding out a cup to me. "Not because you're perfect or invincible. It's because you always found a way to move forward, even when it hurt." I took a sip of the tea, letting her words sink in. Strong? Me? The girl who'd been silent for years, trying to earn the love of people who couldn't give it? But maybe that's where the real strength lies. Not in the absence of fear or pain, but in the ability to keep going despite them. In the ability to hold on to your truth, even when everyone around you prefers a convenient lie. "I don't know what's going to happen next," I admitted. "Who does?" Jessica shrugged. "But whatever happens, you're not alone anymore. You have me, my parents. And now, apparently, your grandmother. And from what you've told me, your mother has taken care of you too." She was right. After so many years of isolation, of being convinced that I had to prove my worth to earn a place in a family, I suddenly discovered a different kind of family, not one bound by deceit and manipulation, but one based on genuine care and acceptance. Later that night, lying in bed, I pondered Winter's words. About revenge and resentment. About creating something new. The future that had once seemed so clearly defined, a prestigious graduate school, then a career approved by my father, was now a blank canvas, daunting and promising at the same time. For the first time in my life, I could choose based solely on my own desires and values. Not to impress my father, not to fulfill my dead mother's hopes, not to prove my worth to Catherine or Brandon, just to be Elizabeth. Who was this Elizabeth? What did she really like? What did she want out of life? These questions seemed both simple and incredibly complicated at the same time, but I had time to find the answers, and for the first time in a long time, the freedom to seek them without fear of disappointing someone else. Outside the window, dawn was beginning to break, coloring the sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day, new possibilities, a new Elizabeth, not Richard Harrison's daughter, but just herself. You know that feeling when you rediscover a part of yourself you almost forgot existed? For 3 months after graduation, I lived in a state of strange ambivalence, liberation from the mask I'd worn for years, mixed with a sense of total loss. Who am I without the definition of Richard Harrison's daughter? What does it mean to be just Elizabeth? The answers began to come from an unexpected source, the past that had been so carefully hidden from me. That September morning, I sat in a cozy cafe in downtown New Haven, glancing nervously at my watch. My coffee had long since gone cold, and my brownie remained untouched. I was waiting for a woman I hadn't seen in over a decade, my Aunt Diane, my mom's younger sister, whose connection had been severed after Elaine's death. It was all thanks to Grandma Eleanor. After our first meeting, the same one I learned about from Harold Winters, she carefully began introducing me to maternal relatives I barely remembered. Diana was always closest to your mom, Grandma said. They weren't just sisters, but best friends. I recognized her immediately, though I'd last seen her when I was 11. The same easy gait, the same graceful movements of her hands, the same tilt of her head, all reminded me of vague memories of my mother. She froze at the entrance, watching me, and I raised my hand in uncertain greeting. Elizabeth, she breathed as she approached the table, her eyes filling with tears at the sight of me, now a grown woman. You look so much like your mom. It was a strange thing to hear this from someone who actually knew my mother. Catherine always said I had inherited Elaine's stubbornness and impracticality, but never mentioned our physical resemblance. We've all tried to keep in touch with you, Diane continued as we settled at the table. But Richard dismissed all of our attempts, saying that it was too painful for you to hang out with people who reminded you of Elaine. I listened to her, feeling the anger building inside, not just at my father, but at myself. How could I so easily believe that my mom's whole family had just forgotten about me? Why didn't I ever try to find them myself when I was older? He told me you moved away, I said quietly, that my grandmother died when I was 12, that you had your own family in Europe. Diana shook her head, her face reflecting my own pain and anger. Eleanor hadn't moved anywhere from her home in Providence. I got divorced 15 years ago and have lived in Boston ever since. We sent you birthday presents, Christmas cards, called you. We tried to meet. But Richard created the perfect barrier. Through Diana, I rediscovered my mother's story, not the watered-down version I'd been taught at home. Your mother was a frail woman, too busy with her books and paintings. But the real Elaine Clark Harrison, a talented translator and art historian whose work was highly regarded in professional circles. A woman who spoke 4 languages and translated rare texts on Renaissance art history. A loving sister, daughter, mother. I have something for you, Diana said after our third meeting, pulling a small box out of her bag. Elaine said to tell you when you're ready. I guess now would be a good time. In the box was my mother's diary, the entries she kept during her pregnancy, and the early years of my life. Her handwriting, neat and graceful, told a story of love and hope. My little Elizabeth, she wrote, I dream of a world full of books, music, and beauty for you. Can you imagine what it's like to read words written by a mother you barely remember? It's like rediscovering a part of yourself you didn't know existed. Little by little, I was reconnecting with my mother's side of the family, who always remembered me and kept my childhood photos, gifts, and even the letters I sent to my grandmother before my father cut off contact completely. They had a lifetime of Elaine, who was systematically destroyed in the Harrison household. Her books, her paintings, her letters, her history. She was so proud of you, Grandma Eleanor said, showing me the pictures. Even when you were very young, she saw something special in you. Elizabeth will do great things, she always said. Along with rebuilding family ties, I began therapy with Dr. Lawrence, a psychologist Jessica recommended to me. You need space to make sense of it all, she insisted, and professional help is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of wisdom. Dr. Lawrence, a middle-aged woman with shrewd eyes and a calm voice, helped me untangle the complex web of manipulation, gaslighting, and conditional love that shaped my understanding of family and self-worth. What your father and stepmother did was a form of emotional abuse, Dr. Lawrence explained during one particularly difficult session. Your academic achievements were partly due to a desperate attempt to earn the love and approval that should have been freely given. I resisted the idea at first. Violence seemed too strong a word for what I perceived as normal family dynamics. But gradually, I began to see the truth. How my mother's memory was systematically erased, how they isolated me from loving relatives, how they created an environment where I had to constantly prove my worth, never reaching an unattainable standard. But why? I asked Dr. Lawrence. Why did they go to such lengths to control me, isolate me, and then simply disown me? People with narcissistic tendencies, like your father, often create elaborate systems of control, she explained. It's important for them to maintain a certain narrative about themselves and their lives. You were a reminder of a wife he couldn't fully control, a life that didn't fit his new image. As you grew up and became more independent, the threat to that control increased. An unexpected part of the healing process was a letter from Brandon, my half-brother, whom I hadn't seen since graduation. It came to my grandmother's address, apparently through the family lawyer. Elizabeth, I never expected you to want to talk to me again, but I have to say I'm sorry for my part in all of this. I knew about some of my father's manipulations and kept silent, and now I realize that I was not just a witness, but an accomplice to injustice. For years I envied you, your intelligence, your confidence, your determination. It was easier to accept the narrative your father and mother created than to admit the truth. It was easier to receive undeserved praise than to earn it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I cut ties with them, moved out of the house, started my own life. For the first time, trying to figure out who I am without their definitions. Maybe that's where you and I are alike now. Brandon, I thought long and hard about whether to answer. Was I ready to forgive a man who had watched me erased from my family for years and done nothing? But wasn't he just as much a victim of manipulation as I was? Just on the other side of the equation? Finally, I sent a short reply. Thank you for your honesty. I too am learning to live without their definitions. Good luck along the way. Elizabeth. Not forgiveness, but acknowledging a shared experience. Not closing the door, but not swinging it open. A small step toward deciding for myself who to be in a relationship with and how. 6 months after graduation, my life took a new shape. I moved out of the Miller house and into a small apartment near my grandmother's. I began to sort out my finances, which, thanks to my mother's foresight, provided me with a modest but steady support. I reconnected with my mother's side of the family, and then came an offer that seemed almost too perfect to be true. I received a letter from Meridian Press, a publishing house specializing in literary translations. They were looking for an associate editor to work on a series of translations of classic and modern European literature. My education and experience matched the requirements perfectly. At the interview, I met Marina Kowalski, the editor-in-chief, a woman with short gray hair and a discerning eye. Your resume is impressive, Ms. Harrison, she said as she looked over my credentials. A double major in comparative literature and art history, fluency in French and Italian, experience editing a university literary magazine. I nodded. preparing myself for the standard interview questions. But what she said next took me by surprise. But to be honest, I was more impressed by your composure under extraordinary circumstances. She looked at me with unexpected warmth. I was at your graduation. My niece was graduating from Yale this year. I froze, not knowing what to say. Graduation, my moment of greatest humiliation yet liberation, was now being discussed in a job interview? Such stamina under pressure is rare and highly prized in our industry, Marina continued, as if sensing my discomfort. The publishing business is full of deadlines, difficult authors, and unexpected crises. We need people who don't lose their heads when things don't go according to plan. I exhaled slowly. A moment that I perceived as a total collapse, someone else saw as a show of strength, a perspective I had never considered. I had to learn to adapt, I said simply. Marina nodded with understanding. And one more thing, she added. Your essay on translating Rilke's poetry, which you attached to your application. It seemed familiar to me. Then I remembered. I had read a very similar article in an academic journal many years ago. The author was Elaine Clark Harrison. My heart skipped a beat. Elaine was my mother, I said quietly. I know, Marina nodded. Her work in literary translation was revolutionary. We published some of her translations in the early 2000s. She paused. I think she would be very proud to see her daughter carry on the tradition. I walked out of the interview with contract in hand and a strange sense of closing the circle. All my life I had tried to earn the approval of a father who could never give it. And now I found myself unconsciously following in the footsteps of my mother, whose talents I knew little about. Have you ever wondered how many of our decisions, seemingly completely independent, are actually connected to people we have loved and lost? How often do we unconsciously seek to reconnect with a bond that seems forever severed? I sat in my small apartment that evening, rereading my mother's diary and looking at her articles on translation that Diane had found. In her words, I saw not only a professional passion, but a philosophy of life. Translation is not just the transfer of words from one language to another, she wrote. It is an act of love and patience, an attempt to build a bridge between worlds that might have remained forever separated. Perhaps that's what I've been doing for the past 3 months, building bridges between past and present, between loss and new beginnings, between the version of myself I'd created to survive in the Harrison house and the version I could become, free from their expectations and manipulations. I didn't know where that path would lead me. Would I ever fully heal from the wounds of childhood? Would I ever find a real home, a real family? But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. Not toward someone else's definition of success, but toward my own understanding of happiness and wholeness. And most importantly, I was no longer alone on this journey. I had Grandma Eleanor, Aunt Diane, cousins and siblings I was just beginning to recognize. There was Jessica and her parents, who proved that family is as much about choice as it is about blood. There was Dr. Lawrence, helping me make sense of the maze of the past. And there was my mother, not as a ghost or idealized memory, but as a real woman whose words and thoughts I could finally know through her writings and diaries. And now there was also a job that connected me to her legacy. Not through imposed expectations, but through a shared passion for language, literature, and the art of translation. Reconnecting is a process that is never straightforward or easy, but every new bridge, every outstretched hand, every honest word brings us closer to becoming whole. Not perfect, not invulnerable, just authentic. And maybe, in the end, that's all any of us really want. Exactly 1 year since graduation. I stand at the window of my new apartment, watching the cityscape, and reflect on the transformation I've gone through in that time. Who would have thought that a moment of public humiliation would be the first step to true freedom? Do you know what the most amazing thing about the process of rebuilding your life is? The way the pieces of a mosaic that once seemed disparate suddenly come together. My position in publishing has evolved from junior editor to head of a small team specializing in translated literature, a perfect application of my education in comparative literature. I find deep irony in the fact that I spent years pursuing a career that would impress my father, and eventually found a vocation that connected me to my mother's legacy. Financial stability came from a combination of a paycheck and competent management of a trust fund my mom had set up. Now, when I look at my bank statements, I don't just see numbers, but a manifestation of my mother's love and foresight. She took care of me in a way she couldn't in her lifetime. Eleanor, my grandmother, has been an unexpected source of support, both emotional and practical. She moved closer to me, to a small house just 20 minutes away. Our Sunday lunches became a new family tradition, a space where memories of my mom live on in stories, photos, and even recipes for dishes she loved. You have your mother's resilience in you, Grandma often says as she watches me deal with the next work crisis or family drama. Elaine would be so proud of the way you handled it all. News about my father comes periodically through the lawyer or Brandon, with whom I'm careful to reestablish a relationship. Our meetings are awkward, filled with pauses and unspoken words, but there is a sincerity in them that has never been there before. Richard has escaped criminal charges through settlement agreements, but his professional reputation is irreparably damaged. His divorce from Catherine, who fought for every penny, has drained him financially and emotionally. Do I take satisfaction in that? Sometimes yes, in moments of weakness. But more often, I feel a strange detachment, as if I'm watching a story that is no longer mine. The most important lesson I've learned from my experience is the realization that healing is not a destination, but an ongoing journey. There is no magical moment when the past ceases to matter or wounds completely disappear. Instead, there is the daily choice to move forward with authenticity, to honor your experiences without letting them define you, to build a life based on truth rather than appearances. Yesterday, I wrote in my journal, looking back on that graduation day now, I no longer see only public humiliation or family secrets revealed. I see the moment I finally chose myself, not out of selfishness, but out of self-preservation and a fundamental commitment to truth. By revealing these family secrets, I freed myself from their power. By losing the family I thought I had to please, I created space for the connections I truly deserved. The path to self is rarely a straight line. Mine began with a public collapse, a moment when a carefully constructed facade crumbled in front of hundreds of people. But it was in those ruins that I found the foundation for something more solid, a life built on authenticity, not approval. I won't say I'm grateful for the pain I went through, for the years of manipulation and emotional neglect, for the moment of public denial, but I am grateful for the woman I became through that experience, for the connections that now form the foundation of my life, for the ability to see the truth even when lying seems more comfortable. And maybe that's where the real legacy lies, not in name or status, but in the courage to stand in my truth, even when it means standing alone, at least at the beginning of the journey.